Hello, tech enthusiasts. I am Sucheta Gawade. I am excited to welcome you to my session, Managing Conditional Access, Enhancing Enterprise Security at the Azure Back to School 2024 event. In this presentation and demo, we'll explore Microsoft Entra Conditional Access, providing you with a comprehensive understanding of how it safeguards your organization and secures access to critical resources. We'll dive into the core components of conditional access, policies, conditions, and controls, and I'll guide you through setting up these policies. Additionally, we'll discuss common scenarios and use cases and explore advanced features like use of conditional access in Microsoft Intune and integration with Defender, leveraging real-time monitoring and more. And before we dive into the main content, let me share about the Azure Back to School event. Captain Hyperscaler, that is Dwayne Natwick, has been hosting this event since past few years, and the tradition continues into 2024. Be sure to explore the links on the slide for more Azure knowledge and resources. And thank you, Dwayne, for hosting Azure Back to School. Some info about myself. I am a Microsoft MVP in Intune Azure Security. I have over 16 years of experience working in large global enterprise IT environments. Currently, I work in healthcare IT in the US. I am the manager of an endpoint engineering team. I hold 15 certifications across various Microsoft Azure areas. I specialize in modern management and enterprise mobility, leveraging Azure and Endpoint Configuration Manager. My socials are listed here if you'd like to reach out for technical conversations. All right, let's dive in and take a look at our agenda. We'll begin by exploring the main concepts of conditional access, what it is, how policies are structured, and how conditional access operates within your environment. Next, we'll examine some commonly applied policies and clarify the licensing and roles necessary for implementation of conditional access. Following that, we'll delve into advanced capabilities, demonstrating how conditional access can be optimized with Microsoft Intune and Defender for Endpoint. We'll also walk through a real-world example showcasing threat protection in action with conditional access. Finally, I'll guide you through a comprehensive demo where we'll set up conditional access policies and explore various components in detail. Okay, so starting with a high-level understanding. Conditional access is a security feature provided by Microsoft Entra ID. It enables organizations to secure their applications and resources by implementing adaptive, risk-based policies. These policies assess signals from users, devices, and locations before granting or denying access, ensuring that only authorized users and compliant devices can access sensitive data and applications. Conditional access is at the heart of a zero trust strategy. It acts as Microsoft's zero trust policy engine because it enhances security by applying the right access controls in the right circumstances. Conditional access implementation helps to verify explicitly, use least privilege, and assume breach, which are the main guiding principles of zero trust. So conditional access lets you create and define policies that react to, for instance, sign-in events, and that request additional actions before a user is granted access to an application or service. The policies can be applied to specific users, groups, and apps. The goal is to protect your organization while also providing the right levels of access to the users who need it. What are the conditional access policies exactly? With conditional access policies, users' access is based on certain conditions. Conditional access policies, at their simplest form, are if-then statements, or if-then statements of assignments and access controls. Basically, an if-then logic is used to enforce security policies. A conditional access policy brings signals together to make decisions and enforce organizational policies. For example, if a user wants to access an application or service like M365, then they must perform multi-factor authentication, that is MFA, to gain access. Another example is if a user attempts to sign in from an unrecognized device, then require them to complete MFA before granting access to the corporate email application. In a sense, conditional access allows organizations to automate and enforce security policies in a logical and consistent manner, enhancing overall security posture by controlling who can access what under specific conditions. Next up, how do conditional access policies function or work? These policies operate through a structured workflow composed of three primary components: signal, decision, and enforcement. Signals are the inputs that conditional access evaluates to determine the risk level of an access request. Signals can be from identities, endpoints, applications, network, and so on. Things like what user is trying to access the resource, or where is the access request coming from? Is it from a trusted or unfamiliar location, or which application is being accessed? So that's the signal part. Then decision. Decision is the logic or policy that determines what action to take based on the evaluator signals. It ensures that the resource access aligns with the organization's security policies. If all the signals indicate low risk, access would be granted. If some signals indicate potential risk, that is, access from an unknown location, then additional verification steps like MFA may be needed. But if the signal indicates a high risk, that is, access from a high risk location or a non compliant device, then access would be denied. Now, understand that this is only the decision making part. Nothing is enforced at this point. Enforcement happens next, after the signals are assessed and the decision is made. Enforcement is the action taken based on the decision, which could be granting access, requiring further verification like prompting for MFA, or blocking access to the resource. As an example, a user attempts to log in from an unrecognized device and location. That's the signal. Conditional access determines that the request is medium risk and requires MFA, which will be the decision. The user is prompted to complete MFA. If successful, access is granted. If not, access is denied, which is the actual enforcement part. All policies are basically applied in two phases. Phase one is collect session details, that is, you gather all the information, and phase two is enforcement. Use the session details gathered in phase one to identify any requirements that are not met. And once all requirements are satisfied, then apply the session controls. As a side note, you must know that conditional access policies are enforced after first factor authentication is completed. Also, conditional access is not intended to be an organization's first line of defense for scenarios like denial of service, that is DDoS attacks, but it can use signals from these events to determine access. Now, many organizations have common access concerns that conditional access policies can help with, such as requiring MFA for users, blocking or granting access from specific locations, blocking legacy authentication, requiring approved client apps, and so on. You can create policies from scratch, start from a template policy in the portal, or use the Graph API. By default, each policy is created in report-only mode. Microsoft recommends that organizations test to ensure intended result before turning on each policy. I'll be demoing most of this coming up. If you have configured several conditional access policies targeting specific user groups, then multiple policies might apply together to an individual user. And in that case, all policies that apply must be satisfied. For instance, if one policy requires MFA and the second one requires a compliant device, then the user must complete MFA and use a compliant device. So a logical AND operator applies to all the assignments. Let's take a quick look at the licensing requirements and the role needed for an admin to effectively manage conditional access policies. Using the conditional access feature requires Microsoft Entra ID P1 licenses. Customers with M365 Business Premium licenses also have access to conditional access capabilities. We learned about signals in an earlier slide, right? And that signals from various sources are evaluated to decide and enforce conditional access. Now note, we can also do real-time and calculated risk detection. Signals can be integrated with Microsoft Entra ID protection, and that allows conditional access policies to identify and remediate risky users and sign-in behavior. Block risky sign-in behaviors is also a commonly applied conditional access policy. Such policies require access to Microsoft Entra ID protection, and so it requires P2 licenses. So if you plan to implement risk-based policies, you'll need Entra ID P2. Other products and features that interact with conditional access policies, such as Defender for Endpoint, require appropriate licensing for those particular products and features. And then talking about the role an admin would need, the conditional access administrator can be granted as least privileged role to manage conditional access. Now let's look into some advanced features like use of conditional access in Microsoft Intune and conditional access integration with Defender. When you leverage Defender capabilities for implementing security in your organization, Defender for Endpoint helps monitor organizational devices for threats and vulnerabilities in near real time. It evaluates how risky the devices are based on factors such as malware detections, configuration weaknesses, and so on, and assigns each device a risk level, low, medium, or high, which reflects its overall security posture. This risk level detection capability of Defender for Endpoint can be combined with compliance policies and also with conditional access policies so that they work together for comprehensive endpoint protection. Compliance policies, which is a feature of Intune, are checks. They define the rules and settings that devices must meet to be compliant. Examples include Windows devices that should be at a minimum OS level in order to be compliant, or in case of phones, phones shouldn't be jailbroken in order to be compliant, and so on. Now, assume a particular Windows device in the environment is not at the minimum OS level that we specify. Then you can have that device automatically flagged as non-compliant using a combination of two things: your compliance policy settings and the risk level that Defender for Endpoint sets on the device. Further, these compliance policies can be combined with conditional access, which can then block devices that are non-compliant. Basically, with conditional access, you can enforce compliance. You can control access to organizational resources based on user, location, device, and risk conditions. Conditional access makes decisions based on compliance signals, such as trusted IP ranges, devices of specific platforms, etc. In our example of the Windows device that is not compliant because it is not at the desired OS level, we can block or restrict access to company resources on such a non-compliant device with the help of conditional access policies. Another example with Intune could be if you're managing your Windows 11 devices via Intune, for instance, and you have a compliance policy to evaluate, say BitLocker on the devices and report non-compliance if BitLocker is disabled, then you can additionally leverage conditional access to block access to cloud apps for such a non-compliant device. Thus, compliance policies in Intune, Defender for Endpoint, and conditional access policies work together to enhance device security, mainly by blocking non-compliant devices. Now let's look into a real-world scenario on a user's mobile device, which is infected with malware, and see how protection is implemented by leveraging together the capabilities of compliance policies in Intune, Defender for Endpoint, and most importantly, conditional access. Assume this user's phone that accesses company resources such as Word, Excel, Teams is compromised. Considering we have Defender for Endpoint implementation in place, it will detect that this device has malware. Now, because Defender for Endpoint identifies this risk, it assigns a specific risk level to the device, perhaps assigning it as a high risk device. If we have configured compliance policies in Intune to flag the device as non-compliant, if risk level is high, then this device will immediately be marked as non-compliant in Intune. Now, conditional access policies come into play, assuming we have appropriate settings configured, and conditional access will block access to company resources on non-compliant devices. In this case, conditional access will prevent the user from accessing the work apps, such as Outlook and Teams, on this infected mobile. So that's conditional access in action in real time. The access to apps on this phone will only be granted back after the device is remediated, that is, after the malware is removed. Okay, with that, it is demo time. In the demo, we'll look into details of various aspects of conditional access policy configuration and setup, and then we'll resume back after the demo. Now, conditional access is an Entra feature, but it can be accessed and configured from various portals. So I am going to share or start the demo with showing you around how it can be accessed from the various portals. That is the Azure portal, the Entra portal, and the Intune portal. Within the Azure portal, you can look up Microsoft Entra Conditional Access, or you can type that in here and search. But if you click on there, it takes you right in conditional access. In the Entra portal, you can go under Protection, Conditional Access, and you see the exact same view that you saw from within the Azure portal. Additionally, in the Intune portal, you can go into Endpoint Security, Conditional Access, and if you notice, this is again the exact same view that you see in the other two portals. So there are a few different ways to get in here. But let's head back to the Entra portal and look at a quick overview or the actual page for conditional access. This gives you some good snapshots into different things that you have configured for conditional access and the results or how they are working for your setup. These things are pretty self-explanatory, so I won't read them out to you, but as an admin, you definitely want to explore this page of overview with the different tabs, and a good one here is the alerts that it gives you based on your policy settings and your assignments. What I do want to show here is insights and reporting. Now, to enable this, along with Entra ID P1 license for conditional access, your tenant must have a log analytics workspace to store user sign-in log data. I don't have one here, but insights and reporting helps you understand the impact of conditional access policies in your organization over time. During user sign-in, one or more conditional access policies might apply, granting access or denying access. Multiple policies might be evaluated during each sign-in. The Insights and Reporting Workbook lets you examine the impact of an individual policy or a subset of policies. The other thing I want to show, which is important, is the named locations. Named locations are specific locations or IP ranges that you define to apply conditional access policies more precisely. These locations can be used to control access based on where a user is signing in from. By defining named locations, you can create policies that allow or block access depending on whether the sign in attempt is coming from a trusted location, like your corporate network, or an untrusted location, like a public Wi Fi network. You can specify specific IP address ranges. You can select countries or regions to define a named location. You can Named locations can be marked as trusted locations, and once a named location is defined, it can be used in conditional access policies to enforce specific rules. For example, you can create a policy that requires MFA only when users are signing in from outside a trusted location. Using named locations enhances your ability to control access based on the context of the sign in. If you look here, I do have one created, which is all countries but USA. So basically what I've done here is, that's the name I gave, but I have selected all the countries, including any unknown countries and regions, and I have deselected United States. So basically I am considering all of the countries here except for USA. So that's my named location. I am going to be using this into configuring a conditional access policy shortly here. So we'll see. With that, let's get into the actual policies. And again, the policy overview page will show you all the policies that you have created, a good snapshot of the policies and Microsoft managed policies and different things that you can do here with the policies themselves, the state of the policies. Um, Basically, state of the policies can be on or off or report only. And report only mode allows to evaluate the impact of conditional access policies before enabling them in your environment. That is, before turning their state to on, like this one. During sign-in, policies in report only mode are only evaluated, they are not enforced. Now, we learned in an earlier slide that policy enforcement happens in two phases, right? Phase one is collect session details, phase two is enforcement. In case of report-only policies, only the first phase, that is, collect session details, happens. The second phase of enforcement will never happen for this type of a policy, which is in a report-only state. The other thing I want to show you here is creating a policy from a template. So you can create a new policy from a template. And if you look, there are various templates available here. Templates provide a convenient method to deploy new policies aligned with Microsoft recommendations. These are templates for some commonly used policies. And then there are template categories like zero trust, remote work. Let's create a policy from a template. Let me pick one, perhaps this one, require password change for high-risk users. You can actually view the settings of this template to see what different configurations it has as a baseline. And you can actually also customize these templates to create your own. And then if we head back to the main page, you could upload them here. So you can use the template, you modify as per your requirements into the JSON file, and then you can upload it back here as a policy template. So let's continue with creating that particular policy from a template, and you could directly hit review and create, or you can hit this, go next, and then you can still go ahead and edit some of the settings here. Basically, you can turn the policy state on or off. Note that by default, the policy state is going to be report only. And the other default here is that it will always exclude the current user from the policy, just so you don't lock yourself out, because conditional policies could be very sensitive when applied. You can also change the name of the policy here. So it does give you some ability and some control to do stuff before you can actually create it from the template. But if everything looks good to you, you can just hit create, and there you go. That's your policy that we just created, and it got created in a report only mode. With that, let's actually create a new policy from scratch. So you would do that from here. Some of the basic things that are required for creating a new policy are, you should have a name, or you should provide a name to the policy. You really want to have some assignments if you are going to assign it to a user or group. And then you do want to specify whether you want to apply it to all the cloud apps, or whether you want to, base it on user actions. And then you do want to give some access controls, granting access, blocking access. So there are certain things that you will have to do to make your conditional access policy work, and most other things are optional. So for our use case, what we can do is, let's create a policy to block access if one of my users is accessing any cloud apps from outside the US. I'm going to leverage the named location that I already created and I showed you a while ago. That has all the countries and regions selected except for the US. So we will leverage that and we create a new policy to block access for my user if she is accessing from outside the US. So for doing that, what I am going to do is, first of all, give a name to my policy. And I'm kind of going to use the similar name, block all countries except USA. I am going to specify the user. I could do all users, but again, they warn you, you don't want to lock yourself out. You could possibly do it on a smaller group first, just for testing. I'm going to select one user, that is Jane, select her. And then for target resources, I do want to select all cloud apps. So I could do that. Again, the fair warning, but you could actually also base it off of user actions, or you could base it off of authentication context. So there's a lot of options here available to you, and it depends on what your requirements are for what you would pick to create your conditional access policy. So select what this policy applies to. I am selecting cloud apps and all cloud apps. And I am actually going to select a condition. And this is where my condition is going to be the location. So I click on that. And when I turn this to yes, I can go to selected networks and locations, and I get the ability to use my named location. This is what I had already created. So I'm going to use that. And what I also want to apply here is control, whether I want to grant access or block access. So our use case is to block access if user Jane is accessing cloud apps from outside the US. So I'm going to say block access. And also note this at the bottom, where you can actually require all these selected controls, with an AND operator, or you can just require one of the selected controls. Here, anyway, I just have one option selected, none of the others. So I'll just leave this as default, select that. And again, this, if you look at the enable policy, report only is the default. I'm going to say create. And that is actually going to create my policy to block all countries except for USA in report only mode. That's the state. Now, that's our policy creation. And like I said earlier, we do want to test first and see what things result with before turning on the policy or before expanding the policy into other users into the organization. So what we can do is do a what if. Now, you can simulate sign-in behavior using this tool. You can use it to troubleshoot. It helps in trying to understand why a policy was or wasn't applied to a user in a specific circumstance, or if a policy would apply in a known state. The what if tool requires only a user or workload identity to get started. So you really don't need to give all the details here. And additional information such as cloud apps, actions, or authentication context, device state, those are optional, but help narrow down the scope for specific cases if you are trying to deal with complex conditional access policies. So let's do a what if based on the policy we just created to block access if user Jane is accessing any cloud apps from outside the US. So what I'm going to do here is select that user. or any cloud app is default. I can leave that as is. Now, what I do want to do here is use an IP address and location from within the US to see how the policy fares. And I'm actually going to use this same IP that is specified as an example here, which appears to be a US IP. I am going to select United States here. And with that, I should be good. This does mean that user Jane is trying to access any cloud app from a US location. So let's see how that fares. If I do a what if, go towards the bottom, you have to scroll down a little bit to see the results. And the results will actually be given to you in two different tabs. This is policies that will apply. So this list shows which conditional access policies would actually apply given the conditions. The list includes both the grant and session controls that apply and include any policies in report only mode. So report only mode policies do come back as being evaluated. Nothing is enforced, but they are being looked at for the results. And then there's a second tab here that says policies that will not apply. So this list shows conditional access policies that wouldn't apply if the conditions applied. The list includes any policies and the reason why they don't apply. It also responds back for policies in report only mode. So if you look here, this policy, block all countries except USA, is actually not being applied for this user, which sounds about right because the user is accessing a cloud app from within the US location. Now, the second scenario we can try out here is what if user Jane was actually trying to access, say, from, let me pick United Kingdom and maybe another IP range, which appears to be a UK IP address. What if user Jane was actually trying to access a cloud app from a UK location? Now, this should be blocked, right? Our conditional access policy should actually take effect. So I'm going to say what if, and if you look now, we won't see that conditional access policy here as being not applied. We will probably see that here, and yes, it is. So block all countries except USA is actually being applied or taking effect for user Jane the moment she tries to access a cloud app from outside the US location. So yeah, that's it for the demo. I really wanted to show you some of the main things here that we can do with conditional access policies, creating a simple policy, creating policies from templates, uploading a policy file, which is a JSON formatted conditional access policy, which is basically a custom policy that you can do. And most importantly, what if? So with that, let's head back to the presentation to finish it up. To recap, in this session, you've learned how to effectively configure and manage conditional access policies to strengthen your organization's security. We explored various examples of and use cases, giving you insights into the features and benefits of conditional access. With this knowledge, I hope you feel more equipped to manage resource access within your organization and take your enterprise security to the next level. I hope you enjoyed the session as much as I have putting it together. Thank you for watching. Good luck and happy learning.